A few years ago, residents in Oklahoma noticed something odd at the bottom of a dried-up creek bed near their homes. It was a deep hole that appeared to go all the way down into the earth, and no one had any idea how it got there. Some thought it was a sinkhole, but those normally aren't this big. Others said it looked like the work of tornadoes, but there hadn't been any tornadoes around here recently. Still others wondered if aliens might be responsible. For weeks, people would stop and stare at the mystery hole, trying to come up with an explanation for its sudden appearance. But it wasn't until a local man decided to take matters into his own hands that they found out what really happened. It all started when Mel Waters was feeding the fish in his pond. He liked to toss in some of the guppies from his fish tank so they could live freely in the bigger pond. That day, though, he couldn't get to his usual spot by the creek because a dried-up riverbed had formed across the path. He knew there was a fallen tree blocking the way, but he figured he could just climb over it. What he didn't realize was that the ground underneath him was going to give way. Mel fell right into a hole in the ground. He tried to brace himself for the impact, but it was too late. When he hit the bottom, the air was knocked out of his lungs and he couldn't help but scream. At first, he thought he had broken something. His head throbbed and his leg buckled beneath him. But as he slowly regained his senses, he realized he was okay. He climbed to his feet and shone his flashlight into the darkness and that S when he saw it. The walls of the hole were slick and muddy, but it was too smooth to be natural. Someone had dug it out by hand. He yelled for help, but no one could hear him. So he did the only thing he could think of and started digging with his bare hands and fingernails. A few minutes later, he broke through the surface and collapsed on top of the dirt pile. Then he took off running. When he finally found someone to tell, they didn't believe him. They thought he was making it all up, so Mel led them back to the hole. It was pretty big, about 12 feet wide and 35 feet deep. And no one could figure out how it got there. Some said it looked like a sinkhole, but those usually don't look like this. Sinkholes form when water dissolves the rock beneath the surface. And while it can happen suddenly, it normally takes place over many years. This hole was far too smooth to have been caused by erosion. Plus, the town had recently dealt with a huge storm that washed away most of the soil in the area. If this was a sinkhole, why did it suddenly appear now? Others believed it was the result of a tornado. After all, tornadoes can pick things up and drop them somewhere else. But this part of Oklahoma hadn't seen a tornado in months, let alone one big enough to make a hole like this. There was another theory. The residents knew that the local farmer had recently lost his barn in the storm and suggested that he might have taken it out on the creek bed. But when they asked him, he swore he had nothing to do with it. As theories went back and forth, Mel couldn't help but think it had something to do with the storm. Maybe it had been covered by water for so long that no one noticed the hole until now. But how deep did it go? That's when Mel came up with an idea. He grabbed a rope and lowered it into the hole. 10 feet, 20 feet, 30 feet. It just kept going down. At this point, whoever or whatever was responsible for this hole had to have been very clever to hide it for so long. It must have taken a lot of effort to dig it out, too. Why bother, though? Why would anyone go through all the trouble of digging such a deep hole? As the days passed, people still had no answers, but Mel refused to give up. He tied a camera to the end of the rope and lowered it down the hole. There wasn't much to see, just dirt and rocks, but then he noticed something strange. The dirt had been packed down so tightly that it looked almost artificial. It was as if someone had intentionally made it this way, but who would do such a thing? The fact that it had been hidden underwater for so long meant that whoever was behind it must have planned ahead. It had to be someone with a lot of time on their hands, someone who lived nearby. And that's when it hit him. What if it wasn't someone, but something? What if it was a tornado after all? Not just any tornado, though. The kind that comes out of nowhere and strikes without warning. Mel remembered hearing about them before, but he never thought they actually existed. They're called landspouts. Like other tornadoes, they can pick things up and throw them around. But they're much smaller and weaker. They also don't stay in one place for very long. Could this have been the work of a land spout? If so, it would explain why the hole was so smooth. Land spouts are made up mostly of wind and water. As they spin around, they can wear away the earth below them, creating a small hole. But why would it have happened now? The answer, once again, was the storm. It brought with it warm water from the Gulf of Mexico. As the cold air from the north met the warm air from the south, it created an unstable environment that allowed the land spout to form. Residents were still skeptical. No one had ever seen a land spout around here before. How could they be sure it was responsible for the hole? That's when Mel had another idea. He bought some metal rods and stuck them into the ground around the hole. He was hoping that if there had been a strong gust of wind, it might have knocked over some of the rods. At first, it looked like it wasn't going to work. The rods stayed upright even though the wind was blowing hard. But then something unexpected happened. One of the rods suddenly fell over. It was the one closest to the hole. This could only mean one thing. The land spout had struck right here, and just like Mel predicted, when the townspeople checked the hole, they found out it was full of water. Because it had been filled in during the storm, they were able to get a good look at the damage. Sure enough, the walls were smooth and round, exactly how a land spout would have made it. In the end, Mel was right. He was the hero of the day. But he didn't do it for the attention. He did it because he was curious and he wanted to understand the world around him. Mel showed everyone that sometimes the most ordinary things can be the most extraordinary. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.